Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the podcast that cuts through the noise to deliver real-world leadership wisdom from the front lines of business. I'm your host, Billy Duren, CEO, curious learner, and passionate student of people and performance. Whether you're leading a team of 10 or 10,000, this show is your go-to resource for creative insights that drive results and build people. Whether you're already in the CEO chair or you're just beginning your journey, this is a theory, it's the nuts and bolts. Let's go to work. All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duren. Happy today to welcome our good friend, Jason Bader. Jason is the principal of the distribution team. The distribution team specializes in providing strategic business coaching, inventory management training, technology utilization to the wholesale distribution industry. Over 40 years experience working in the distribution field. He's overseen various operational teams, managed small and large facilities, and served in an executive management capacity for the last 10 years with the distribution career. So, Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Billy. Always a pleasure to hook up with you again. It's been fun. It's so funny when I have to change that bio to say 35, then 40 years, and I mean, those decades just keep rolling along, my man. It's just like, oh, here we go.
You've had a great career, and I mean, we've kind of followed each other before the word follow each other was popular for a long time. You've done some work with our team years ago, and I had the privilege of being on your podcast a few weeks ago, and it was just incredible.
Yep.
And Jason, I just think back to, when we first started talking about the distribution model that we had at Threaded Fasteners and the experience that you brought into the room. What kind of drove you into this market, and how did you get started here? We'll just kick it off with that and go from there.
Well, I got conscripted in. So as I started with my family business, dragged in at the ripe young age of 13. So my father broke a few child labor laws to get me involved in the company early on. And literally after 8th grade, I never had a summer vacation after that point. I was pulled into the family biz, and we were a contractor supply business. And so, again, very familiar with the fastener world. I mean, that was really my upbringing, and tools, fasteners, those types of things. So, yeah, that's how I got in. And, each summer grew a little bit more, learned a little bit more. And then, once I graduated from college after a brief stint in Japan teaching English, came back in and, spent the next, I think it was 5 to 7 years, really working in the family business pretty heavily. And then, made a decision to kind of follow my passion. And what I realized is I'm a teacher. And I didn't really know that before, but I realized that was my calling. I was a teacher, and I wanted to share the things that I'd learned in the family business. And, really it's kind of funny as an English teacher and some other teaching and coaching jobs. And I didn't really know I was a teacher until that moment. All of a sudden, I was like, I think there's something else I should be doing with my life. And so I left my family business and decided to latch on to a gentleman named Scott Stratman and go out and start teaching and coaching and spending time with a myriad of different distributors, not just my home industry, but really learning what wholesale distribution and all the fun and foibles of that arena were all about. So that's really how I got in and why I'm still here.
So, Jason, along the way, I mean, you come to this understanding of being a teacher, and you kind of come back and get into the biz, and you're kind of going forward here. And when did you go, I can do this? I mean, this is something I can do. And did you begin to see some patterns in the places you were going and seeing some similarities how did that unfold? Tell me a little bit about how that unfolded. Because, we talk about leadership here, and sometimes as a leader, just like you said to me once before, did you grow up wanting to be in the nut and bolt business? It's right along with being a fireman or an astronaut. But sometimes things just unfold. So how did that happen for you?
Well, I think as again, when I was still in the family business, I really started to attend conferences, and I started to see people that were not from my industry necessarily, but they were in wholesale distribution. And I started to hear patterns there. That's when I started to begin that pattern recognition and seeing that even though we had different things on the shelves, we we had the similar problems and challenges and things. And I thought, okay, that's really fascinating to me. And then when I decided to kind of leave the family business and go out and follow and start, going out and working with different distributors, that pattern started to come up again and again. And it was things like I started out really more that operational inventory management. That was kind of the world I started out in. And I started to see the things like dead inventory and different ways of interacting and the challenges between sales and inventory management and sometimes people throwing grenades over the fence at each other and not being incredibly happy about working together. And so I think those are the kinds of patterns I kept seeing over and over again regardless of what was on the shelf. And then I said, okay, I can be product agnostic here and I can really focus on what are the nuts and bolts of a wholesale distribution company. And this is something I've shared with many owners, especially next generation folks coming into these organizations, is don't get so married to the product on the shelf. And don't get so married to the customer that you are currently serving today, because that can change. And I think that can be incredibly limiting if you do that. And just because you are in the nuts and bolts business today doesn't necessarily mean that you could dovetail, you can't dovetail into the contractor supply or the industrial supply or really anything that you choose. Once you become a student of the distribution, wholesale distribution, you can put anything on the shelf and you can make that work.
Yeah, well, when we were talking and you actually mentioned my good friend that lives in Alaska, Mike Mortensen, in a completely different industry, but a very similar distribution model that we have inventory, we have clients, and we have patterns. And so when you think about all the companies that you've been working with, and by the way, you mentioned that that hand grenade going back across the fence from sales and inventory management. I've actually heard it said you've entered into the dark side when you go into purchasing. So there's definitely some fences in between, but we hope they're chain linked so we can at least see each other. But what are some of the operational challenges, those significant patterns and operational challenges that you see developing?
Well, I think it's a lack of, if we're going to specifically between the two that we just talked about, what I see is there's a lack of understanding, a lack of trust between those two entities, frankly, because they don't really understand what each one does for a living. Now, one of the things when you're
talking about sales and inventory management.
Sales and inventory management.
Yeah, I want to make sure we're talking about Threaded and Mike Mortensen's company. We're talking about sales and the sales and the.
Well, you two have a lot more in common, than a lot of companies think. There's a lot of similarities between those. Oh, absolutely. So. But specifically between sales and, let's say, inventory or even just operations, sales and operations, because that's a little sometimes more relatable to a broader audience. But what I find is that they don't understand what the other one's doing. So sales, in order to sell product, they need to have inventory. They need to have new products and product flow coming in and inventory on the shelves and whatnot. But they don't really understand the decisions that the people in those inventory management or procurement side have to make on a daily basis to make that happen. And so what I find is that if they would just slow down and understand the decisions that have to be made there and how those folks go about their job and their business on a daily basis, then I think that, they're less frustrated. They understand the process a little bit better. Now, flip side. Inventory just for buying stuff at inventory's sake is not going to happen. That's not going to make money at the end of the day. Somebody has to put it in the hands of somebody else. And so understanding the challenges that salespeople have to go through and, maybe the questions and the directions and the changes that those folks are fielding on a regular basis. Once the two sides actually start understanding what the other one does, now they can start to work in concert. And I think you can start breaking down that barrier between them. And it's not the dark side or the light side or vice versa. It's now, how do we work together to really, come to our common goal of profitability in this organization. I mean, and that's really what both sides are trying to get to. I think they just go at it from a different perspective.
Jason, everybody loves change, right? Everybody loves change. So, when you walk in the door, you've almost got change maker tattooed across your head.
Yes.
And when it comes to change management and how you communicate the goal being the operational efficiency. So how do we begin now working in concert to make this, to take the idea of being disruptive out of it, but to insert the word, we're looking for efficiency. Is there a difference between operational culture and behavioral culture? So, sometimes, we have a culture at the organization and we look at it, we've been doing this for 1,000 years in operational culture. What do you mean we're going to change? Yeah. How does those two things function together by having a strong enough culture that can accept, hey, in order for us to be better, we've got to change? How is having that strong behavioral culture enhance the operational culture change?
Well, I think, Billy, one of the big things is without trust, there is no, business. There's no culture without trust. And so I think that honestly, this is rather than trying, to change a direction. The first and foremost, if you're finding there's a resistance to change and you're finding many of the people are challenging this or the resistance is really, it's a lack of trust. I mean, that's really where it comes down to. So as a leader, I think you have to step back and say, okay, I have to work on my communication skills and work on my trust side first. And when I can find that side and really develop trust with a majority of the people, now, are you going to get everybody? No. I mean, let's just be really honest about it. Some people are still going to not trust what you're doing and not want to trust. And that may be part of their DNA. And I think there's a certain part that you just cannot reach. And that's okay. So when it comes to trust, I think that what we're really looking at is it's not my will imposed on others, and I think that's not how we build trust. It's really, as leaders, we have to look at the people. It's really other-centered, not self-centered. Really building trust in others is about understanding what is going to work for them and how do I be a better servant to them. Now, it's not meaning that I'm ceding control and I'm ceding, I'm giving up my responsibilities. That's not what that is. It is really understanding how can people absorb what I'm talking about and feel comfortable with the direction. And once we find that trust level, then I think change management becomes a lot easier. So if someone is struggling and they're running against brick walls and they can't find a way through, you got to step back and say, hey, do I need to slow down and look at the way that I'm communicating and I am creating a trusting environment? And that's often the case, is that I have gotten a little over my skis and I've gotten a little bit too far ahead of myself. And I've conjured up a vision in my head that nobody else is privileged is allowed to see. And I failed to communicate that. So I think I've just gone beyond where I'm supposed to be. And I think sometimes that's where as leaders, sometimes we get really excited, very excited about a direction we want to go and, what we want to do. And we forget that maybe people can't see that vision yet. And maybe we need to step back and learn to communicate a little bit better. And then we can bring people along the journey with us.
Yeah, I think the nugget here for me is when we're talking about change or shifts, that we want to make sure that we are communicating clearly. I am one of the people that are guilty of thinking while I'm talking instead of thinking it through before I start talking. And I found out early in my career that people are listening to things that I'm saying, and I have to be very careful about how I'm saying them when I'm just I'm just thinking of an idea, but I'm thinking that idea out loud, how that could create angst around, oh, good night, we're getting ready to make this huge change when all I'm really doing is thinking about it. So I think that is important that we think through those things as we communicate and before at times we communicate. But Jason, you got a really unique perspective here because you're the CEO, business consultant, change management expert. When it comes to all of those hats that you wear, I'm assuming sometimes those are really complementary, but sometimes those could create some conflict in your own space. So what is that like, having all of those hats walking into the door and saying, how can I help you?
Well, I think that, yes, I do wear all those hats, and it's just the world I chose to be in. It's the world I chose, and nobody else put me here. But I think, honestly, Billy, the best way I can go into any situation is that I have to kind of push a lot of those preconceived notions of I have expertise out of my head. And I have to go in being the listener. I have to go in really with almost a blank slate. And yes, do I have a few tricks in my bag? Absolutely. And I have experiences, and I have things that I can bring in. But if I'm not listening and I go in with preconceived notions into these engagements, whether I'm speaking, whether I'm doing a podcast with someone, or whether, I'm doing a consulting engagement or teaching, any of these, if I go in with preconceived notions of this is how it's going to go, man, I've failed already. I'm of no service to anyone at that point. And so, frankly, for me, it's slow down. Listen to the challenge. What is going on in this company? And draw on your expertise, draw on some experiences. Expertise is kind of one of those funny words I don't love. And I often have a difficult time sometimes saying you're an expert. It's like, really? Who are they talking about? Who's that guy they're talking about with that, subject matter expert? I don't know who that is, but I want to listen to what the challenge is. And then I'm really trying to tease out the points of conflict. So for me, yes, do I have some experience around different organizations I've helped and seen and whatnot? Or do I have some experience around my own personal, how we operated as an organization? And then do I have some experience with how I manage my company? Yeah, I do. But I think that I don't want to draw those in until it's time to share. And I think each one of those components give me the ability for someone to trust me, because that's honestly, Billy, where I've got to go first. Is I've got to get people to trust me first. And when I'm speaking on stage, I have to do that in the first 5 to 10 minutes, or else it's a worthless shot. So I talk about. I share a lot about my personal experience, and so I tend to be very open book, very. Hey, this is how I got kicked in the teeth numerous times, and I am just, I'm not, and I try to I try to get to a position where people feel like, yes, I'm one of them, because I am. I'm just, man among men, worker among workers, friend among friends, that's who I am. And so people tend to look at it and say, okay, I can share my challenges with this person. He is not going to look down on me. I'm not going to be judged. That he's here just to kind of see if we can kind of muddle through some of this stuff and make my life a little bit easier. And if I can get to that point, Billy, I think I can be of service, in these situations I'm invited into.
And what I'm hearing from you is that, I had a good friend of mine who's a consultant, and he actually, Alex Moss was on our podcast, and he said consultants are notorious for shedding light on places where there was no darkness. And we can get this idea of, I'm going to come in and be the expert, but I love the way you frame that up. Let me come in and be the listener. Yeah. Let me come in and be the great listener and hear what the pain points are. I was just on a call before coming down for the podcast today, and we're talking about, we're looking for some boutique services in automation and that sort of thing. And I was talking to the CEO, and we were going over this, and he said, listen, I just want to come see what you're doing. So I don't have a one size fits all. Let me see what you're doing. And then let me see if we can make some suggestions around that. So interesting the way you frame that. I love that. I picked some stuff off of your website that I really love that I want to talk to you about. And maybe this is a little bit of a pivot, but tell me what branch manager boot camp is. I love that phrasing, boot camp.
Yeah.
So tell me what branch manager boot camp looks like.
Well, because it's quick. I mean, I think that's where the boot camp comes in. But, branch managers, as you know, get elevated to positions sometimes, and nobody really gives them any training. And so, you might be the greatest inside salesperson or counter person, and you've got that job licked. I mean, you are great at it. And then somebody comes to you and says, boy, I think you're really good at this. Why don't you become a manager, branch manager? And I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm not going to give you any guiding principles. Why don't you just go do that? And I think that's when the disservice has been. That's a tremendous disservice. I saw it in my family business. I've seen it honestly for the last 20 years of my career on the consulting side. Is I see this happen over and over and over again. And so years ago, I was given the opportunity to develop a branch management curriculum or a program to help get branch managers a little more comfortable in their positions. I mean, I just want them to be successful. I just want them to not flame out, because what happens, and this is very common in the branch management world, and I'm sure you've seen this, before, is that someone is elevated to this position. They've given the anointment and the crown of branch manager, and they still take on all the jobs. They still do everything that they were doing before, and they have a very difficult time now delegating and moving things into the appropriate, moving tasks or activities into the appropriate people, because they feel like they should still be doing everything anyway. And so what I try to help them understand is how to give themselves permission to be the supervisor, the boss. So that move from bud to boss is a really tough transition. And so what we did is we created this boot camp. And what I do, I talk a lot about some of the skills, and it can be operational skills. Then I move into a lot of the soft skills, because I think one of the things I ask people when I do these types of trainings is, all right, what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now? What makes your life difficult? Because I really want to hear, I want them to walk away from that session answered, like, I'm going to give you a few tricks, here's how I would approach this. But what I've found over the years is, yes, there's a lot of operational challenges, that they run into, and maybe it could be inventory, or it could be, why do those purchasing people keep sending me stuff that I don't think I need, or, those types of things. And so I hear some operational things and some more tactical things, but then I hear a lot about, how do I manage people? How do I recruit? How do I retain? How do I talk to people of different generations? And I hear a lot of those types of things come up, and that becomes pretty dominant in those questions. And so really the boot camp, or the session, the day and a half, really addresses a lot of those challenges. And what I really want people to walk away with is just a few different ideas that they can implement back at home. So that's the boot camp.
So we're gonna take a really quick break, and I want to come back and talk to you a little bit about how you moved from just talking about the distribution pieces into more of this business leadership challenge. So we're with Jason Bader. He is the principal at the distribution team. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company with a mission to create value in and for the people we serve. If you're interested in learning more about our people-centric culture or need a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, we're back with Jason Bader. And Jason, we kind of picked up from the boot camp, and part of the transition I'm hearing from you, and in the last couple of times we've talked, is you're moving more from just talking about forklifts and pallets and pallet racks of inventory to you're starting to approach the model of business management. So how did that evolve?
Well, I think, Billy, it came from a bit of a frustration in my practice, is really where it came from, is that I could help people on a from an inventory perspective and look at maybe even warehouse management organization and inventory procurement and setting inventory levels and getting rid of dead stuff. So I could really help people on that. But what I found is that, yes, I could present all of this and go forward, but inventory management does not live in a vacuum. And so what I found is that we could do some of these and I could give advice, but they were struggling with implementing a lot of these changes because of other individuals in the organization. And so what I found is that if I really wanted to help these organizations, I had to be more of a holistic inventory or distribution advisor is really the way I had to move to, just because I realized that the relationships between other elements of a distribution company were going to affect this operational side. And if I didn't help them understand how to look at this operational challenge or this inventory challenge from their perspective, if I didn't help and look at that, then nothing was ever going to really get done. And kind of like the point you made earlier about consultants is shining a light where there was no darkness, and I just couldn't get anywhere. I just couldn't get anywhere, and I found myself frustrated, and the client felt themselves really not able. I mean, they were able to get a little bit of traction, but not the traction we were looking for. And so that's when I started to work with leadership, the owners of organizations, do some coaching there, and looking at the sales side and how do I help the sales side understand this, the operational side. And so that's really where it became a much broader perspective for me, and realizing that inventory can't live in a vacuum. And I know there's some great inventory experts out there and they're really good at it. And I love them because I call on them often for advice, but I couldn't do that. I had to really see the bigger picture and help the organization from a bigger perspective. And that isn't an ego thing. It's more of what I was frustrated with. And I saw the client was frustrated as well.
So Jason, when, if there was a magazine out there, probably is a magazine out there called Distribution Today. If you opened up the Distribution
Yes.
Today magazine in 2025 compared to 50 years ago, you might see advertisement for boxes and pallet racks and forklifts and all the things typical around distribution. Mm-hmm. But today, you opened up the 2025 version, you're going to see AI tools, advanced analytics,
Yes,
all the technology and automation. So where is distribution going, and how are you plugging into all of the advancements in the tools around distribution?
and Billy, as I've mentioned to you before, I love the AI revolution. I think it's fascinating to me. And I'll be honest, I don't exactly know where it's going. I really don't, but I want to be part of the conversation. And I think that that's the most important part of it. Again, consultants sometimes, try to tell you where it's going rather than the journey. I want to help people get on the journey. The destination is not relevant to me, at least at this point. It's really more, how do I help you get on the journey and start educating yourself about these tools and what digital transformation looks like. And, I have a relationship with a lot of different providers and things like that, but ultimately helping people understand, well, what are the challenges you want to face? Because, buying technology or getting on, buying this stuff for technology's sake, or because you think the other kids on the block to have something cooler than you do, that's a great way to waste a lot of money and get really frustrated and not really move yourself forward and not move your organization forward. So I think really helping people see that there are tools and there's direction in our industry that are, they're going, but ask yourself what's right for you, and what is going, and look at your company. What can your company absorb? What can they, assimilate? And are there other things that maybe have to precede this? As we talked about with, trust and change, because going down the digital revolution and running down the AI path and all of that, boy, you're going to drop a lot of people on that journey if you don't know, if they don't trust, where you're going here. And so I think stepping back and looking at your organization first, are they ready for this? And what are they ready for? I mean, there are a lot of different, like, boy, you could get into the warehouse space and you could really go automation heavy. And, I've seen people that, there's robotics that literally move pallet racks around and they bring them to you. I mean, that's pretty far out stuff. I mean, that's pretty cool. But is your organization ready for that? Or, like voice picking and things like that. Is your organization ready for that? It may be cool looking and really fun to fantasize about, but is it the right next step for your organization? And so I think, I think you have to separate the noise, from where your journey looks like. And that's what folks like myself, we can help with, because we can talk through. Here are the thing, and I think that part of my responsibility in this thing is I have to go and expose myself to a lot of different emerging technologies. I expose myself and I do my best to swim as fast as I can to understand and to get a slight perspective, and I don't have to be an expert in any of these things. It's really get an understanding and say, okay, where would this fit? Because most of the people I work with, Billy, are, these are independent business owners. These are family businesses that might have been to the next generation, or, in your case, these are, ESOP organizations, that have become employee owned. And, these are, a lot of them become privately held organizations. And not all of them can swallow these pills, as fast as the pills are being dealt. And so a lot of my challenge and a lot of my, my role here is to help expose people. Okay, well, this is a direction you can go if you're challenged with this. If you're having a challenge with, perfect example I ran into, fairly recently at this AI conference was, if you have a challenge with getting salespeople to call on dormant accounts, for example. I think every distributor has dormant accounts on the books. I mean, you could have 1,000 of these folks. We've got them on the books and they are not doing anything with them. They haven't bought anything in 12 months, so they're dormant accounts. And so how do we tap into that? Because I believe there's gold in that dormant account. And so I found a couple of technologies that, we don't necessarily have to have real people reaching out to those, but there's automation, that can go out and make very intelligent types of conversation or contacts with those folks, whether it is email or it's, actual voice agents reaching out and making phone calls. That technology is here today. Is it ready? Is everybody ready for that? No. But I think part of my role is to expose that and to share that. And it's like, if that's something you think you want to take on and go for it, then let's go for it. I'll help you, meet the right people. I'll help you look at your organization and say, are you ready for that? Do you want to do that? Okay, well, let's go ahead and do that. So I think to your question, there are a lot of different things we're seeing in the Distribution Today magazine. But is it right for everyone? No, it's not. It's absolutely not. And so, slow your roll a little bit and kind of find what's right for you.
Well, I love the technology conversations that we have almost with every podcast. But I will say this: when we're at the conferences, when we're in the big cities, and we're at the big conferences, I'm constantly trying to think about how does this connect to our people on the floor? Because like you said, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. But does that make sense for us? I'll tell you, the robot calling does not make sense for me. I've had somebody calling me from California trying to set up a loan for me for the last 3 weeks. Her name is Jessica. She's a bot. She calls me once a week. Yes. She's calling me, telling me that I've been approved for some loan. But when I heard her voice, I recognize it, and this is not legitimate, genuine. So that technology, even though it's available and developing, there are some industries and some people that would say no to that. So yeah, there are going to be those things. But I love the idea that we are looking for the tools, because one of our podcast guests just recently said that it isn't that AI is going to be replacing people, but the people that accept AI are going to be the ones that benefit from those tools that are available. They're going to pick those tools up and use them, and that's exciting to me. So Jason, just some more little commonalities on the things that you're seeing when you're going to businesses. What are the common blind spots? What are the things that you see that everybody misses it? What's a common blind spot for the distribution companies?
I think one of the common blind spots, and this really shouldn't be this way, but I'll tell you, Billy, I run into it over and over and over again, is goals, common goals and measurements. Again, I spend a lot of time around branch managers, and different operations. And so as we grow, hey, I tell people, look, if you're a single location entity, you're the luckiest kid in the world. You are so lucky. Just don't ever change. Please do not get lulled into the I have to branch, because your life just gets more complicated. But if you do, and I assume that many of your listeners here do, and our audience here does, and that's fine. Look, I came from a multi-location organization. Your company has grown exponentially since you and I first met. But what I found is that measurement has been lost along the wayside, and common measurement. And I think this is honestly what helps managers. It's their rudder, and without those measurements. So I'm a big believer in an operational scorecard for each of these, locations, and scorecards it's just another word for measurements. So, and I don't like the fancy KPI expression. I think that tends to confuse people. It's just a scorecard. Okay, so here are some basic measurements in each one of your locations, and let's go with maybe 8 and maximum 10. Let's not get too crazy with this. 8 or 10, key ways that we need to run this location. And so I tend to find that that's really missing, is that people don't. And it's almost like they assume that we should know how to manage these by these operational, objectives, but nobody states them. And so I think that's what I would share with anyone is this is one of the common, and I don't care how long you've been in business or how big you are, man, I just see a gap there is we don't have these common measurements. And these are things that we look at every single month. Where are we? And I'm just going to pick out a few, like dead stock, for example. It's like, okay, what's our dead stock percentage? Or, what is our gross margin percentage? Or, what is our, gross margin dollars per ticket or something like that, lines per order. You can go down the list, and there are common ones, of course, for distribution. But I think when you get those into place, and your managers and the people who work in that location really understand what each one of these goals are, man, you're going to start cooking with grease at that point. I mean, that's when it starts getting good, because we look at this every single month. And so I do a lot of work sometimes, with people who oversee branch managers. So we can call it a VP of operations. Sometimes, the branch manager doesn't really have a nice ring to it. So we got to come up with something better than that. But I do work with them. And what happens sometimes with those folks is they go into these different locations and they get, yanked into the personal problems, the emotionally based challenges too quickly. And they don't get into how are we going to make this operationally profitable or whatnot? And so I share with them the first thing we want to talk about anytime we go visit one of your branches. And they're charged with visiting branches. And sometimes people don't understand why they visit. What's the purpose of that visit? Well, the purpose, in my opinion, is to go over the scorecard. Let's walk down through the scorecard. Hey, great. We're green light on this one, green light on this one. Ooh, we're on a yellow light on this one, or we're red on this one. Great. Let's talk about the strategies we're going to use to pull ourselves out of yellow or red light. And it becomes that simple, Billy. I like to keep these things really blocking and tackling and simplicity. And with each one of them, and it becomes a conversation. So when that operational manager goes down and meets at each one of these operations, they're going to provide real value when they show up, because we're going to talk strategy about the areas that they're in deficit and really couch it in a way that if I can help you improve these measurements, then, we're going to help improve your wallet. or, however it works out. But that's the blind spot I see often, is a consistent set of measurements in each of those locations.
So Jason, as we kind of turn toward the more personal things, what when you look back, you've been doing this for a while, and when you look back on your career, what's the legacy? What's the fingerprints that you want to leave on our industry?
I think this is okay. So this is going back to why I chose this career. Why I moved from my family business, which, honestly, I look at my brother's wallet and paycheck and I'm like, man, was I eating paint chips when I decided to leave, or what was it? Was I crazy? But I also realized, as I said, I realized I'm a teacher, and I realized that I like servant style leadership. I mean, I think that is. And so if I could leave a legacy, if I could look back and say that, this is what Jason was about. This is how he went about his practice and his career, is that at a certain point in his career, he realized that he was in service. That is what I do. And that's why I chose this career. And I believe, and I sometimes hesitate to bring this up in public spaces like this, but I'm going to, because I know this is something, that you resonate with as well, is, I've spent a lot of time in my life trying to understand, a God of my understanding and God's will, and what is God's will for me. And I think that is a really tough thing over the years, to really kind of get your head around, and really, as a young person, that can be very difficult, and try to understand, well, what am I supposed to be in my life, and where am I supposed to, how am I supposed to make my impact? And when I stopped doing that and realizing, okay, being in service of another person, that is God's will for me. And I had to come to that realization. And so if I really look, and I know it's kind of a long answer, kind of a roundabout answer, but for me, it's really, if I am in service of another human being, I believe that I am doing, the God of my understanding, God's will. And so that's what gives me purpose. And that's what helps, guide my life. And it also guides my practice. I mean, it's all one and the same. It kind of all comes together. And so servant style leadership and being of service, that is what I want my legacy. If somebody sees me speaking on stage, they say this person is not lecturing, they are trying to serve that audience. Or if I'm working with a client, like your organization or whatnot, I am trying to be of service to that client. It's not about me or self-centered motivations. It's other-centered motivations. And so, hopefully that kind of, you kind of see where my perspective is, but that's what I would hope others see as well.
Yep. I love that answer. And, I tell young people often, it's one of my favorite things to tell young people, that God has a great big plan for you. And part of the encouragement for me is I have a front row seat to watch what he's doing, and seeing those things develop in you, and how those are going to develop and resonate in others. So, Jason, if we had someone here in the meeting room with us today, and it was a young emerging leader, and just kind of words of wisdom, how would you encourage them to get started on their leadership journey? What advice would you give to the emerging leader?
So, again, kind of going back to where my personal philosophy comes to. One of my favorite words is humility. And again, this took me from when I was younger. That was not part of my vocabulary before. I did not really understand. And I think it's because I associated humility with humiliation. I didn't understand the difference between those two. And so my favorite definition of humility is the ability to remain teachable. And if I could share that with that person, that young person, and say, be teachable, be coachable. Because when you have all the answers, and when you know it all, you cease to grow. And at that point, you coast, you only coast one way, and so I share with people today that I think that the greatest, superpower they can have is being teachable, being humble. Yeah, it's okay to not know the answer and be willing to seek. I mean, I've met so many people over the years who are great seekers and people, who are, late 80s, 90 years old, and you look at them and like, how have you found the fountain of youth? Where's that coming from? And I think the greatest answer I ever heard is humble curiosity. And I went, wow, be curious and know that you don't know everything and accept that and really enjoy that. I think that's the fun part for me, at least, as I shared with you earlier, when I go into a new organization, just that time, I'm curious. What is going on with these folks, And I think that's what still makes it interesting, it still makes it exciting for me is I don't come in knowing it all. I get to learn every time I go into places.
That's good stuff. And I am, when we first started this podcast, our engineer, Johnny, he told me, stay curious and you'll be fine. That has been our mantra. That's been our charge, and it's been an incredible experience. Yeah. So, Jason, I'm so glad that you took time to be with us today. Tell people if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach you?
I think the best way to find me is probably go to the website, and thedistributionteam.com or distributionteam.com. That's one way to find me. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with anyone. So just come find me on LinkedIn, or as you shared earlier, I do have a podcast. I'd love to, I love to meet people on the podcast. I love to learn. And several of the guests, now you and I knew each other, so that was a little different, but I have a lot of guests that I've never met before. And I love being curious. So, the podcast is another source. So those are all ways you can find us. And, when people, if they want to reach out and ask me a question, about something that's going on in their company, the meter doesn't start running until I have to get on a plane. I am happy to share things. I don't need to, charge anybody for that. You and I've been around this a long time. And I think it's an honor when somebody asks you that question. Those questions, how would you handle this? So I'm encouraging folks, reach out, ask me questions. I'm happy to share what I have.
Jason, it has been my privilege and my honor to be part of this today. I've just kind of been along for the ride. So thanks for taking time to being on the podcast with us.
Oh, certainly a pleasure, Billy. And so glad you and I reconnected, recently. So,
all right. I'll be right back with some closing thoughts. All right, what a great interview with Jason Bader. I love Jason. I love his humility. I love the way he goes about his business. Such an inspirational leader, not just in the distribution space, but in the business management space. I love his slogans and his wisdom nuggets that he was dropping on us from bud to boss. I mean, that was part of my experience. I was with a team, and in the next week, I'm in inventory control, and before long, the people I was standing right next to, I had moved into a different relationship with, and it is difficult, and I appreciate him sharing that. Also picked up the common goals, the blind spots, the things that are missing in companies that he's seeing, some operational scorecards, and he even dropped some of those on us. So I really enjoyed our time with Jason today. And if you are in the distribution space and you're looking for a great team to come alongside you and look at your operations, Jason has been a part of our story, and I appreciate what he's done for us. I'm already looking forward to our next episode, but until then, tighten up.
Thank you for tuning in to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the proud employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc., where our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our community, and in our customers? Visit us at threadedfasteners.com. Thanks again for listening. This show is edited and produced by Johnny Gwynn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.